John, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
It's just great to be here, Andrew.
Now, your full-time journey with Rhema began 18 years ago, but I understand that your affiliation with what was Radio Rhema back in the day started a few years earlier than that.
It did, actually. Whilst I was a university student, actually, I heard the story of Rhema. I think I'd seen the launch of Rhema on the air. My dad had said, look at this on the black and white TV. I think Prime Minister was pulling the big lever and opening the station. I remember being very impressed that there was this Christian radio station. There was a promotional tour that Radio Rhema, as it was called back then, had done, and I'd met a lady by the name of Anita Wilkinson, who was one of the first announcers at Rhema. And I chatted with her, and she said, oh, write to the station manager if you're interested in broadcasting, and I did that. And I duly made my way on a student standby fare to Christchurch. Actually, Andrew, it was the first time I'd ever been to the South Island. I think I was 19. I began some work for Rhema in my university holidays, and that was the beginning, I suppose, of my association with Rhema.
The world of broadcasting has changed. The technology we use, the way in which we do things, but also the broadcasting opportunities have changed so much in these last 18 years, haven't they?
Yes, they have, yes. In Rhema's case, multiple networks now. Life FM, was established when both you and I were involved in those days. Southern Star, then of course ultimately television as well with Shine TV. So the delivery mechanisms and channels was much greater, and of course more recently it's really blown out to include many different mechanisms.
Can I rewind that a little bit though, because the move from having Radio Rhema to the Rhema Broadcasting Group with Life FM and Southern Star initially coming on, and then as you say Shine TV, that was a huge step of faith. Perhaps some would say a much bigger step of faith than joining with Rhema originally, and you were very much involved in those key decisions and taking those risks for God.
Yes, it was. They were exciting and scary times, Andrew, and as you know, once again, you're involved in it. As we launched out and launched these stations, and it was a huge amount of work to get them on the air and then to keep them on the air, just even financially, it was a huge challenge for us. I remember that as we launched those stations, we also had a refurbishment going on at the Network Centre in close to the Central Business District in Auckland City. And the roof of the Rhema building was quite old and it needed to be replaced, and it was very rusty, and so they determined, the contractors who were doing the work on the building and I guess the management at the time, we decided that the best time would be, I think it was probably February, whatever it was, and so the roof was duly being deconstructed and then reconstructed, and two things happened. There was this huge power outage in Auckland. And we, of course, had to have generators and batteries to try and keep these new networks, which were just recently put on the air, literally continuing to broadcast. And then with the roof being partially deconstructed, huge torrential downpours occurred. It wasn't normal for that time of the year. I went into one of our technical areas and water was pouring in into the building. We had to call the contractors, and we developed we've got plastic, and we made little swimming pools, and we pumped them out, and it was like a nightmare. As the station manager, it was as though all hell had broken loose on this group that had expanded out to have programming for young people, programming for those mature people. We'd made this big push out, and it was like we were under attack.
Because often there is that spiritual component that happens within Christian broadcasting, which is above and beyond what you'd be able to explain as in normal circumstances. And I suppose the spiritual aspect or the spiritual challenges of Rhema Broadcasting, it's part of the territory, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I don't know that I was that well prepared for it when I came to work for Rhema, Andrew. But over the years, of course, I've realised that these things are closely connected and linked. And, it's this sense of trying to find God's plan in every situation. And, there have been times when we've felt very much under attack, sometimes physically. We've had a few scares as well, as you know. But, it's trying to hear from God and say, God, what do you want us to do? How do you want us to become better people for you? Soldiers, if you like, in this war. Because there's no doubt about it. I'm more convinced than ever that the spiritual war that rages is huge. It's of an enormous proportion, and it's unrelenting.
I mean, it is a battle for people's souls. Back in those days, you were, well, station manager and then became networks manager with the increase of the stations. And you had, if you like, the two-edged sword of saying, well, you got all the complaint letters, but you also got the letters of testimony, the stories of people whose lives were touched and transformed by the broadcasts. I mean, that must have been so encouraging, even amongst all the struggles and the attacks.
Yeah, it was incredibly encouraging. And I think we all, as staff, we all needed that because, yeah, we did get attacked and people just didn't necessarily like what we were doing. Yeah. And we're here for those who are not Christians as well. I mean, we have to look after both, and hopefully we do that in a way that honours God. But yeah, it can be difficult. And those testimonies, Andrew, were so encouraging to us. And of course, there are hundreds and, in fact, thousands of email, letters, phone calls that we've had over the years, and it's been hugely encouraging for us. I have the feeling we only see the tip of the iceberg, and I think God just allows us to see enough. After all, it is, you know, it's God who changes lives, not us. We're His stewards. But it's so nice to have the encouragement.
It is, and enough encouragement to take the next step, not necessarily seeing the whole journey. And it's certainly been a remarkable tenure as CEO, and again, seeing the organisation grow significantly. The size of the organisation, the opportunities to broadcast, and again, during those 12 years, hasn't broadcasting changed significantly?
Well, it has indeed. Again, because it was just a year or two later that Shine Television sort of came to us, if you like.
Now that was a big step because we'd always been radio broadcasters, and a few people were thinking, well, why are we doing TV? As the CEO, you had to make that decision and also defend it.
Yes. Yeah, well, certainly I had to. The board looked to the CEO to say, well, you know, what do you think about this possibility? And it's interesting because it was November of the year before Shine TV came into being. I had this sense that something was coming in the middle of the next year. Yep. I just had a sense. It's difficult to explain. And I remember starting to voice this to people. I remember being at a conference, it was Evangelism 2001, I think it was called, and saying to people, look, Rhema needs to be ready for the middle of next year. Then I also voiced it to the board. I said, I just think there's something happening. We've got to be ready. And I didn't really know why. It was about February of that year, 2002, we had Dennis Delaney from Freedom Television come to visit us and talk to us about...
Who you'd worked with so many years ago in the past.
Strange enough, yes, all these tie-ups. I love the way God does that. Yes. Connects us up. So when Dennis Delaney came to explain about Freedom Television to us and saying, look, would Rhema help to promote it? I remember at the time thinking, well, yeah, we'd love to help promote it, but boy, I'm glad we're not doing television. I thought that I may have even voiced it to some other people when he wasn't in the room, but I thought, man, I'm glad we're not doing that. It's such a big task. But at the middle of the year, Freedom Television came knocking on our door and said, look, we've done all of our research. We believe, we've prayed, we believe that this should be part of the Rhema Broadcasting Group. And you know what? I just knew in my heart, it was bang in the middle of the year. God had so generously said, to me, be ready for the middle of the year. And I actually thought it might have been a snap election or something. Okay. That's what I thought it was going to be. Cool. But it turned out to be television. So I just knew in my heart that it was what we were to do. But was I scared? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Over the years that you've been involved as well, I suppose we look back on some of the significant events of history, and that Rhema Broadcasting has been able to be there to give a Christian voice to these significant milestone events. Now, thinking in particular of the events of the morning of September 11th and the way in which Rhema was able to respond to that. And more recently with the circumstances of the Christchurch earthquake, there's those significant moments where people say, well, this doesn't make sense. Broadcasting that eternal message of hope to people who wouldn't necessarily go to church. I mean, in some ways, that's what Rhema's there for.
Absolutely, and we got letters and things afterwards, or I spoke to people afterwards, and people tuned into us on during these times because they're looking for some answers. And whilst we can't explain why what's happened has happened, we can tell them what Jesus talked about difficult times, what the Bible tells about these valleys of Baca that we go through. We certainly journey through the valley of Baca at times. The valley of tears, all of us do. And that's where God's word, his promises, are so the food that we need. I think when those things happen, it's pretty scary. And when God says, fear not. He doesn't say it won't, he never says it won't be scary. That's the interesting thing. The scripture never says that, does it? It just says, fear not, for I am with you. And for Rhema Broadcasting Group, this mission that people so generously support is there. It's a very powerful mission. And some nations, of course, simply don't have this wonderful blessing. So I personally think, I'm a bit biased, of course, but I do think New Zealand is so much better off having a national broadcaster that can freely broadcast these messages.
John, I suppose when looking for words to describe you and, who is John Fabrin? I mean, broadcast, of course, would have to be in there from an early age. I would also say visionary leader, but very much a man of God. And that has been evident in the way in which you've led the team and led the organisation in the way forward. Just like to take the opportunity to say thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for your inspiring example to many people, to a generation of people in New Zealand. And thank you very much for being faithful to God's call on your life. Thanks for your time today.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I'm very grateful, and I just want to thank God for his goodness to me, from when I was a little fella. I love the fact that God sees us, before we're born, and just honour my mum and dad too. It's a nice thing to do publicly. And my dad passed away a few years ago, but my mum is a great woman of God. My family as well. My wife Deb and my two daughters Natalie and Sarah, my son-in-law Johnny. It's great to be part of a family, and I've always considered Rhema as being part of our extended family. So thank you everybody for the privilege of allowing me to be part of this work.
Andrew Urquhart talking there with RBG's outgoing CEO, John Fabrin. And from all of us here on the End Zone team, Mate atua koe e manaki. God bless you, Mr. Fabrin, and thank you for everything that you've done for us and the organization.